So here we go, we're recording. This is the block of the month. Busy Bee block of the month, month 3. Okay, so we do have a lot of folks that are not with us today, and that's fine. So because I am recording, so you guys can always refer back to the recordings. If you can't get up with me, you got a question, you can't get up with me, go back to the recording, maybe that will help you. There's always a link. I have a YouTube, Queen Bee has a YouTube channel where I record everything too, and you can go to my web page. There's a link on my web page for you to be able to go to the, refer you back to my YouTube channel where my recordings are, okay? So there's always that. A lot of stuff coming up. I've got a vendor event that I'm gonna be at in May. You know, Cape Fear, Lillington now has a little festival every May, the first weekend in May. They call it the Cape Fear Fest, and they have a duck race. You ever heard of a duck race? Where they put the little bathtub duckies in the river, and I guess the first one across the finish line wins a prize, or the first so many win prizes, and then there's another, what they call the lucky duck. And if you've pulled the number, you know, you buy a duck and they give you a number, right? So if your duck is the duck number that's pulled, you're the lucky duck that wins another prize. But they're going to have vendors set up. They'll have, you know, activities for little kids. And there's supposed to be live music. It's a whole big shebang. I think it gets a little bit bigger every year, but it's supposed to be down on East Front Street. And that'll be May 4th. It's supposed to be always the first weekend in May. Always supposed to be the first weekend in May. I would like to see, anybody have major problems with last month's stuff that we haven't already gone over or covered in person?
I got my blocks together, but I haven't spread them up as a big block.
Okay.
I was already confused with my measurements, so I brought them today, and I thought that we had time, and we did not.
Okay, yes, we'll have time. We'll get you blocks. So squaring up seems to be a problem. It is a skill that you need to learn, because you're going to have to square blocks forevermore. If you're going to quilt, you need to learn how to square blocks. Because the more I promise you that the more, especially like when you're doing your big blocks, the more you square your pieces, the better you can, you know, the more, obviously we want to cut accurately. We want to, you know, we want to mark our pieces accurately. So we got to be able to we got to be able to read the instructions and follow the instructions. We got to be able to mark our pieces like we need to mark them if they have to be marked. We need to cut accurately, and we need to be able to sew seams accurately. Okay, so those are key. You must be able to do that. So a lot of times pattern makers will have you make a block a little bit bigger so that you can square it up and trim it down to a size. Okay. So Kathy Davidson got hers early, and because, you know, she likes to jump the gun and she wants to get ahead. See me roll my eyes, Kathy? That's why I tell y'all, I want you to do this a month at a time. I don't want you to get ahead. I want you to master the blocks that we've already worked on and get those under your belt and be comfortable with those before we move on into something else. So anyway, Kathy moved on, and she got to a point where she called me. She was just in a panic. I don't know what I'm doing. And it should have been a straightforward square, you know, seam connections, and turns out there was a typo in one of the blocks for this month. So we need to go over that, and matter of fact, we'll do that little block first, just so that we can get that out of the way. Okay, so again, Kathy Davidson was the one that brought this to my attention, And so we're gonna, if you'll pull your instructions out of your kits, if you look at your instructions for the uneven 9 patch, all right, so if you go down to color B under your, because it's going to tell you, this one, you have to make 5 of these little blocks. Okay? So a 9 patch is a block that has 9 smaller squares in it, right? There's all kinds, y'all, you're going to find there's all kinds of variations to these blocks. Okay? A half square triangle is probably one of the most widely used blocks. I have yet to see, there's not many quilts out there that don't have a half square triangle in them. So you got to learn to, you cannot be afraid to cut on the bias. You can't be afraid to sew a piece that has bias. And so once you get to the point that you can, again, this is what I'm saying, these are, you know, these, a lot of these samplers, a lot of these blocks that we're making are variations of the same block. So some of it is straightforward squares and rectangles. Okay, just like this, squares and rectangles. And some of it are half square triangles and or flip and stitch blocks. And you gotta know how that, you gotta understand how they work, and you gotta, it'll make it much easier if you learn how the block works, how it's put together, why you do things a certain way. So if you look at color B, it tells you that the dark green, which are going to be these blocks right here, these 4 right here, it says the cutting directions tell you to cut that 2.5 by 3.5 inches. You need to change that to a 2 inch by 3.5 inches. 2 inch by 3.5 inches. So make that change on your pattern. 2 by 3.5. Now, because I knew that there was an issue somewhere, because she kept telling me, Lynn, this just doesn't work, because these blocks originally, it tells you color C and D, which is your yellow and the coral print. It tells you that these blocks are 2 inches square. Well, if you cut these 2 inches square and this one's 2.5, it's not going to meet up. It's not going to meet up. And she was like, well, how do I do this? And I said, okay. She had started to attach on one side, which is what you would eventually do, but she had done like the middle section all together and sewed her 2.5 by 3.5 to the little 3 1/4 or 3 whatever it is square in here, 3.5 inch square. And she couldn't make it match. And she says, oh, I'm just going to have to, I've sewn every one of them. I'm just going to have to take them all apart. Stop. Don't take it all apart. Just trim 1/2 inch off the side. Just trim 1/2 inch off of that. The ones you've already got sewn, you don't have to take anything apart. But the other 2, she would have to cut down. So I played with it a little bit with my blocks. Because if anybody's going to play with a block, it needs to be me, right? Because y'all are like short on material. You've got just enough to do the deed. When I cut it out, I cut them all at 2.5 inches. So I changed the colored blocks to 2.5 inches. Well, when I got to looking further down the instructions, y'all, every one of these small blocks, if you pay attention, every one of them, the finished size of the small blocks is 6.5 inches. 6.5 inches. So it doesn't matter whether it's this one, the ones we've already made. If you think about it, think about the quilt as a whole. All the small blocks are the same size. They're all 6.5 inches unfinished. Unfinished means that you haven't attached it to a bigger block or to a row of blocks. Okay. So this is, while you finish making this block, this is not a finished block. This is an unfinished block because it's not attached to anything. Okay? So what I had to do was to go in and square up these blocks. Now, I know you're going to ask me, how do you square up a block that doesn't have the line in it? Because I remember talking to some of y'all about you need to have a ruler that has a diagonal line in it to be able to square up your blocks. Well, you have to have that if you've got a half square triangle. That's what a ruler with an angle in it. That'll help you. So your square nut ruler needs to have a diagonal line that goes through the middle corner to corner of your block. Yes, that's fine. Yes, you probably need a bigger square ruler. So I, I recommend a 10 and 10 and a half or a 12 and a half. Because if you're squaring small blocks, you can use a smaller ruler. But see, our block is 6.5 inches unfinished, so this is not big enough. It's just a 6-inch ruler. How big is your ruler, Stacy? Okay, so 6 or 6.5. Your orange section on the outside doesn't give you the extra half inch? Yes. So that's a 6.5 inch ruler. So you can use that one. Okay? So, y'all, there are a gazillion rulers out there. Okay? So when you're buying rulers, when you're looking to buy rulers, okay, because most of the time, Jan, have you not found this to be true? When you get ready to do a quilt, a lot of times it'll tell you the materials that are needed for that quilt. A lot of times if it has a specialty ruler to it, it will tell you, not necessary, but highly recommended that you purchase this such and such and such and such a ruler. And as you're taking classes, you're going to find that you may have to buy a ruler for a class. So don't let that come as a surprise to you. But the good news is that once you get them all, you don't have to buy any more. They last forever as long as you take care of them and try not to cut them with your cutter, cutting things. But anyway.
Rulers that are better than other rulers.
Yes, and it depends on what you're doing. So if you have trouble with your ruler sliding on your fabric, then you may want to get one that has Creative Grids makes a series of rulers that has the whole back of the ruler has got a coating on it that keeps it from sliding off your material or sliding around on your cutting mat. You can purchase, and I don't know if y'all can see these, I know it's hard to tell, but on here, you can buy little adhesive stick-ons to stick onto your rulers. And if you look at my little adhesive, there's actually a dot in the middle. They're donut shaped, and there's a dot in the middle, so if you've got smaller rulers, you can put the little dots on something else. I didn't realize that was what I didn't step 3 of them down.
And you can get those at this.
Yes, I have them in my store. If you need some, call it, and I'll bring you some. Yep. So, there's a block in here that we're going to do this month for month 3. It's called a flying geese, and there's 2 or 3 different fancy kinds of rulers that you can buy, but it's a pretty simple process. And the instructions that Abby wrote tell you how to make multiple flying geese at one time, and we're going to go through that. So we have done. What's the address here? The numbers. Okay. It's okay. It's fine. I just told her it's behind Hardy's on 8th Street in Lillington.
Yeah.
She'll have to get Google out. Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, so, all right, so, um, rulers. Oh, this is one. This one has the coating on the back. If you want to feel that coating. I love that ruler. They are expensive.
Does that make it not soft?
That makes it not slide. When you put that down on top of your fabric, it ain't going anywhere. Matter of fact, I'm getting ready to have to buy another 6.5 by 24 inch one. Um, yeah, I've already rubbed like all the way around the edge. You can see because I use mine so much. Um, but so we're gonna jump off. This is just one example. This is a creative grids that they don't have the like this one's I told you creative grids, but it's Quilter Select. This is one ruler, and I can tell you that the Quilter Select rulers. I can purchase some of them. So if you have a specific need, let me know and I'll special order it for you. I can have it usually within 2 weeks. Um, this one is Creative Grids. Creative Grids does a really nice thing with their rulers. They put a non-skid, like a border around it, and usually there's several places within the body of the ruler that you can see that have, it has a non-skid grippy dots on the back. I don't, huh? Okay, so this is a specialty ruler. This one is one for making flying goose. This is their specialty ruler for flying goose. Because we're gonna make a flying goose, we're gonna actually make a flying goose for this month, okay? So, rulers are important. You'll eventually, you'll have probably, if you stay doing this hobby for a long time, you'll have a lot of rulers. It just is. Just is. So, let's go back to squaring. When you're purchasing a ruler, I want you to pay close attention. When you're buying rulers, again, I think I touched on this last month, but when you're buying rulers, you really need to not just have your inch marks, but you need to have 1/4 inch marks and 1/8 inch marks. Okay, so there should be 8 little tick marks, and the 1/8 inch marks should be something that you can easily see on your rulers. Okay, because one of the patterns this month, this look around the squares.
Are there 8 marks in between like the 1 and the 2?
Um,
There's 7. And then I look at it,
okay, and then the 8th one, so like from here to here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that makes 8, 8.
so the 2 mark is your 8.
Yeah, the next number up would be your 8 of 8
Okay.
on your tick mark. But so you need the 8 inch marks as well as 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch marks, and don't be, so you got to pay attention when you're buying your rulers. Okay, that's what I'm gonna tell you. You got to pay attention when you're buying your rulers. When you're buying a ruler to use to square blocks. Okay, when I talk about squaring up a block, I'm talking about you put all your pieces together, you put all your cut pieces together, and it tells you this block should measure 6.5 inches unfinished. So you will want to square that block to 6.5 inches. Okay, you're going to square it up. And I like to use the corner that has, because a lot of rulers will have inch markings all the way around your ruler. Okay, it'll be marked off in inches all the way around your rulers. And I like to find the corner that has the 1 and the 1. Okay, because see, this one has 1 and 9. This one has 9 and 9. This one has 1 and 9. I like to go the 1 and 1. When I'm squaring up a block, I go 1 and 1 to the 1 and 1 corner. Okay, and from that corner, That makes it easier for me to see where I'm supposed to be. So if I got to be 6.5, I got to go to 6.5 across this top and 6.5 across the across and then down, just like a crossword puzzle, across and down. Okay. Now remember, you want to take, if your block is big, and a lot of times your block will have a little bit of something hanging over, or we want it to have a little bit of something hanging over for you to trim off. You're going to trim off all four sides. So you need to take a, because you can cut two at one time, right? So if my block is this much too big, okay, I'm going to cut across here, and then I'm going to cut down here. Okay, then I'm going to turn it around. Okay, so if I already cut off of this bottom corner here, off that coral piece on the bottom corner here, the next cut I'm going to make is going to be, I have to turn it around so I can cut off of that corner. You see what I'm saying? I'm going to turn it all the way around, or exactly halfway around, so that I get the other two corners. And so if I'm an inch too big, I'm going to scoot this one out a half an inch, cut. I'm going to turn it, and then this next time I'm going to line it up exactly on my marks on the inside of this ruler, right? I'm going to line it up exactly to 6.5 inches, because we're saying this is 6.5 inches. And at 6.5 inches, I'm going to cut off everything 6.5 outside of this ruler. And that'll give me 6.5 inches square, right?
So the first cut you know, down on the bottom there, where's that going to be?
Okay, so the first cut, if I am 1 inch, if I'm we'll say I'm a half an inch too big, okay?
But you're going to put it at 6.5 inches.
I'm going to look to see if I'm at 6.5 inches here and 6.5 inches here. Okay, I'm going to measure the whole block. Okay, the whole block. Because I need to see just how much I'm too big. Okay? And then, if I'm, like in this instance, I was a half an inch too big. So what I would do is I would, instead of going to the full half an inch too big, because I know I have to cut off both sides, I'm going to divide that in two. I'm going to make 2 cuts. Okay? Actually, I'm making 4 cuts, but I make 2 cuts per side, and I'm going to spin it and do 2 sides at a time. Okay? So if I'm a half an inch too big, so like this one you can see is perfect at 6.5, because I've already trimmed it. Okay? Can you see that? So what I would do, if I wanted it to be 6 inches, I would come down 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch. So I'm going to come down 1/4 inch, and I'm going to come in 1/4 inch. And that's going to have me with some overhang on these 2 sides. Okay? So then I'm going to cut that. Zip, cut it. Okay, so I'm going to cut across and I'm going to cut down. And that gets rid of 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to turn it all the way around again. Remember I said we're going to turn it all the way around. And this time, I'm going to line it up on my 6 1/4. 6 1/4, 6 1/4. And that leaves me just a little bit on the edge to trim off of. It should be 1/4 inch. Because you got to take a half an inch off, and you got to take some from both sides. Because otherwise, you're going to end up with a block that has great big stuff on 2 sides, and then a little bit of stuff on the other 2 sides. And so your block is no longer centered. Okay? So if you're using a smaller ruler, and your ruler has a line that runs diagonally, and that's what I did with these. In order to get that, I wanted to be able to center that up. Okay, so here's another way you can square up a block. This is another way. I used, and I don't know if you can see it or not. I'm gonna try to put it up against my shirt. You may not be able to see it on here. But when I put this block underneath here, I tried to find the center. Okay, because I know that I was working with a 3 1/4 inch block here, 3.5 inch square, 3.5 inch square here. By all rights, that should be 3 inches by 3 inches by 3 inches by 3 inches. So that square in the middle should fit exactly within these marks. Okay? And if you look on this ruler, going down this diagonal, there are little L's. They look like little L's. And so I was able to line up within the block, and I can show you individually how I did that, because I know it's hard to see just looking on this ruler, because this is even a different brand. This is an Omni Grip ruler. This is not my favorite ruler. I just use it because it is of a size that I use frequently, and I do use it. I do use it right much, but it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. Okay, so I was able to determine that I needed to take off a half an inch because I had made the block way too big, trying to figure out where the problem was. Okay, so we will continue to work on squaring up blocks, and if you need help, please get with me before, because remember, if you're not 100% sure that you're doing it right, don't cut it off. Don't cut it off, because you can't put it back. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't put it back. You cut it off, it's off. Can't add back to. Just saying. All right. So this block is the uneven 9 patch, and it is fairly straightforward. You're sewing straight seams. You're going to sew the top 3 pieces together. You're going to sew the middle 3 pieces together, and you're going to sew the bottom pieces. This is easily chain pieced, so I think I did the first 2, the middle 2, the bottom 2, opened them up, pressed them, and then added the third column. Okay, this is a row, this is a column. I added the third column, and then sewed all 3 sections together, because that would give me 3 sections, and then I sewed the 3 sections together. Bam, bam, open them up, and again, you guys, I'm always an open seam girl. Just the way I like to do it. So this one is pretty straightforward, and you have to make 5 of these for this month.
And then because you're actually off the five, so it have to be 5, like 5
Yes, that's cutting for 5 blocks. Okay. So I find it easy, y'all, to use these little. Oh God, almighty, that hurts. I gotta put them in there. Okay, so I find it easy to stack my pieces on one of these little boards and I put flannel on mine. Okay, I just find it so much easier to keep up with my pieces. Okay, and when you're making 5 or 6 blocks at a time, or if you're making a quilt that's 1 block, you'll find patterns for 1 block quilts or 2 block quilts. Sure is easier to like put your pieces together when you can see what it's supposed to look like in the end. I actually lay it out, and I lay my little stacks just like they're supposed to be stitched together. It makes it so much easier for me. So that's the uneven 9 patch. Bada bang, bada boom. All right. So I'm gonna put this up here. You want to come look at it? Oh, it's a foam board. Foam board. You can get it at Walmart.
Wrong about Dollar Tree,
Yeah.
I thought I saw on
When I bought the last batch, I bought from Walmart. I bought the foam board from Walmart. What you're probably gonna have trouble finding is white flannel. Yeah. I struggle finding white flannel, but I do have some made. If you want to purchase some from me, I have them made. So, all right. So, already made. Don't have to make them yourself. Let's talk about the big block. Okay. The big block is called the Star Tooth variation. Again, it is another 14.5-inch block. Okay, it is a 14.5-inch block, and this is what it'll look like when you're finished. This is the finished block. Again, I use my little foam board to stack my fabric up to make it easy to work. This one is pretty you're going to make the same block you just made for the very center of this block. Pay attention to your fabric changes, okay? Because I think we're adding fabric to the big one, and you may or may not use all the fabric in the other ones, okay? So pay attention to your fabric, what you're cutting. Again, you are only cutting one square, okay? So you're going to make your uneven 9 patch. That's the center. The other little blocks are not, again, they're not terribly difficult because, again, it's kind of like your uneven 9 patch, but you're going to have, it's 4 pieces, your little corner pieces. That's the block part that I made next, was the corner pieces. Okay, you've got the smaller corner, a bigger corner, and then you've got 2 of the same size rectangle pieces. So the top 2 together, so the bottom 2 together, press them open, and then sew the top to the bottom. Now, if like I was using a directional fabric, if I was going to make this block and do a 1-block quilt with this, if you're using a directional fabric, pay attention that all your little pieces or your directional fabric, see I've actually used 2 directional fabrics in mine. So if you see my stripes, I wanted all my stripes to go a certain way. So now all my stripes are going a certain way. They're all going the same direction. I don't have, they're not, one goes this way, one goes that way. That kind of makes me dizzy when I see stuff like that. But they're all going the same way. The other thing is that there's writing in this little beige block that I've used, which is supposed to be your yellow tone on tone. And my little beige tone on tone has words on it, and I wanted my words and my little pieces to be all upright. So this block is directional for me. Okay. I don't think any of your fabrics are directional other than the ginghams. I think the ginghams are directional, so you have to pay attention to those. Any that has a straight line or a stripe or writing or something like that on it, figures, they may be directional, so you need to pay attention to that. Which direction does it need to end up in? And sometimes that's difficult to tell when you're cutting because it kind of looks backwards. When you're cutting and you flip it upside down, and then you got to flip it back the other way, so that's pay attention to the details. Okay, so again, you're only making one of those, but let's talk about the top. Yay! So we've made, I think everybody in here has made a star where you're making star legs, and this is the part that I'm talking about with the star legs. Come on in, have a seat. Our numbers are few this morning. Everybody's sick or has other commitments this morning. So.
Did anybody get sick after the last time we were here?
Me?
I was like Tuesday. We were dying.
Yeah.
I've been in there for 2 weeks every time I go in.
Oh, wow. So we're recording, so you can go back and see the first part of the thing here, first part of the class on your kit. Just pull out your instructions for now. On the uneven 9 patch, I'll go over it again right quick. On the uneven 9 patch, which is the first small block, there's a change, there's a misprint, and so you'll need to make that change. You need to change the 2.5 right here to 2. I have it right here. If you need that. Okay. So let's talk about points, star leg points. Okay, so the idea is that when we're making something that has points, stars have points, half square triangles have points. We need to be very patient with ourselves and take our time putting these together. Because basically what you're doing is you're taking a rectangular cut, see my rectangle? And you're gonna take 2 squares and you're gonna draw your line on that square. And remember, I talked to y'all about I'm a frugal cutter. So if I've got a block big enough, I'm gonna draw my main line diagonal corner to corner, and I'm gonna flip I'm gonna put it where it's supposed to be up in the corner, and I'm gonna when I stitch, I'm not gonna stitch exactly on that line. I stitch a little bit to the outside. Now, when I'm talking about the outside, what I mean is that upper outer corner. That's the outside of that block. Okay, that's the outside. I stitch a little line, 1 or 2 thread widths. Okay, you have to be careful with that because you can go over too much, and then your block is too big. Your square is too big. Okay, and then you end up having to trim a bunch of blocks. But if you do this just right, what'll happen is that when you fold this up, it should come perfectly to the corner. If you folded it exactly in half, you shouldn't have any hanging over. It should match up on the top and on the side. Okay? Make sure that when you're pressing, that you press. We're not rubbing to iron, and you have to let it sit there long enough for it to actually crease the fabric. So press. I go back and 1/4 inch away from my seam, especially if I'm doing a big corner or a big snowball, I go back and add that little extra seam 1/4 inch away, and then I trim it off. And that way I've got a whole another little half square triangle I can use sometime later down the road. I keep a big Ziploc bag up underneath my sewing table, my cutting table, and I throw all of them in there. Sometimes I take time to press them out, sometimes I don't. If I'm in a hurry, I don't. Just throw them in there. I can trim it to whatever size I need it to be. Okay? Now, with the star legs, a lot of times, what you're going to see, and I'm going to tell you, I always start with the upper right-hand corner. So, as I'm looking at y'all, it's going to be my left-hand corner, but I always start in my upper right-hand corner. I put that right-hand side piece on first. If you're left-handed, you may find that it's easier for you to remember to put your left hand. Whichever one you do, always do that one first. Okay? Just get in the habit of doing it that way, because every now and then you're going to come across a pattern where you're crossing these over, and you want to have it crossing the same way so that it looks the same on your star, or on your series of stars, or your series of corners. You want it to look the same all the time. You want to have that continuity. Does that make sense? You're looking at me, wrenching your eyebrows up.
No.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I didn't want to confuse you.
Doesn't happen often, but.
So, always start with the same one. That way you know where you're at, and it also helps you to know where you're at. Okay. So this, and again, there's what you're going to end up making is a flying geese. Okay, your star legs are flying geese. Okay, if the point comes together, like right here, this little section right here is a flying geese. So flying geese the point comes in the middle, you got a flying goose. Okay? Sometimes you do take a square block and you put it on a corner and you flip it up and cut it off, flip and stitch. Okay? Sometimes we do those and it makes a snowball. If you're cutting off a little tiny corner of a square block, it's a snowball. It's snowballing. That's what they call that. That's the terminology that gets used. Okay? Now, like I said, there's a gazillion and one ways to make flying geese. But for this block, you're gonna see that one comes across the other. Okay? It actually is gonna lay across the top of the other block. This is important that you have some overlap, because when you sew your star leg, when you sew that rectangular block to the big square block, remember, you've got to have a 1/4 of an inch of extra material to go into your seam allowance, to become your seam allowance. Okay? Now, this is not always possible, because sometimes we shave ourselves a little short when we're cutting our pattern stuff out. So it's important that you know how to fudge. You ever heard that word? To fudge it? You're going to fake it till you make it, right? So I'm going to teach y'all how to fudge a little bit. All right, so this picture, and I'll pass this around. This picture shows a normal, what should be our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And it also is going to show us where our folded pieces come across, and ideally where we want to see the cross come across. So when you hear me talk about a teepee, this is what I'm talking about. Okay? It's going to cross, and where the teepee, where the two folds come across each other, leaves a stick up in the air this way and a stick up in the air this way, and it makes what looks like an Indian feather, not dot. Teepee, okay? Don't mean to insult anybody, but there it is. Makes a teepee. And when you sew across there, ideally you would want to sew that at the cross, or the intersection of those two lines. Okay? Now, when you're sewing, and you want to make sure that you don't cut off, a lot of times when you're sewing things that have star legs or points, a lot of times the pattern will tell you to do a scant 1/4 of an inch. This whole entire quilt, you are supposed to be sewing scant 1/4 of an inch. Okay? So what that means is that if you look at this, there's a red line. There's a red line on top of my pencil line, and that's just to notate my scant 1/4. Okay? Scant 1/4. Now, so let's say, for instance, that we have not got a full 1/4 of an inch from where the lines intersect to the cut edge of your fabric in that seam allowance. Uh-oh. What do we do now? What am I going to do now? I'm going to cut that point off. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Because we're working with bias, okay, and our fabric is a little forgiving. Sometimes, if you have one side that's short, like the top half is shorter than the back half, right? And you need to make that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, you can do a little woo swerve to get to where you need to be. You do not want that to be a sew along straight, whoop, 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 and come back. Yeah, we don't want it to be that noticeable. You want it to be a gentle arc, okay, to fudge that. So you got to look ahead a little bit to what you're doing, okay? So there's an okay fudge line, and there's a not okay fudge line, and they're different colors. So again, that's one way you can fudge that a little bit. The other ways, you could put a little bit of stretch on it, and you don't want to stretch it as you're going, because what that's going to do is throw your whole entire seam off, okay? But if that's what you got to do to make it to the other edge, just know that, sometimes if you put together two pieces of fabric and they don't exactly come to the end, always put your longer piece directly on the sewing machine deck. I'm going to call it a deck because I don't know what the terminology is for. On the bottom, okay? When you're sewing through where your seams intersect on top, because you're sewing right sides together, correct? Right sides are together. When you're sewing the right sides together, you want to be able to see your intersecting lines on top. You want to see your teepee on top. That way you know how, if you've got to fudge a little bit. Hopefully you won't have to fudge on every single one of yours, because then you'll end up with bubbles. But sometimes we can use a little instant blocking water with a little best press. Sometimes just warm water, depending on the fabric that you're using. Sometimes that'll be enough to make it not wrinkle. Of course, unless y'all are making a showpiece, but when you wash it, it's gonna wrinkle anyway. So in my book, I don't care. Let it wrinkle. You know, if I've just got one little place here, you know, on that block, okay, I'm good with that. I don't know about y'all. I'm pretty much a perfectionist, and Terry will tell y'all. So, yeah. So sometimes you just got to say, oh, it's okay, it works. It's not a hole. I've caught the fabric. Another trick that you can use to fudge things. Here, let me pass this around so you can see. Flip it over. Another thing that y'all can do for fudging is if your fabric is short, okay, if you don't have quite enough fabric, okay, you trimmed a piece too small, and you've got another piece that's bigger behind it, go with the bigger piece. If the bigger piece is the one that's close to your actual measurement, when you're running your fabric underneath your presser foot, measure not to the shorter fabric, but to the longer fabric, okay? It may put you a little short catching and making a good seam. Again, pay attention. So something that I use, not pay attention to me, but pay attention to where you're going and what you're getting ready to sew. Okay, pay attention to what you're sewing, because you can mark that with a pen when you get to the other side of it if it's just barely catching. I keep an old eyeglasses case, sitting right there at my sewing machine with a little pair of scissors in it, and inside that little eyeglass case, I keep some scraps of fusible interfacing. And if I see that I've got a seam that's going to look a little short, and I'm worried about the fabric fraying, I can use the stop fray or fray check, and or a piece of that fusible interfacing. Kathy's got you an example right here. Kathy, I'm sorry, I'm gonna call you out. You held it up, so I'm gonna show you. If you use a lightweight interfacing, it's just enough to give you a little extra body there. Okay. It's like an instant iron-on glue patch. Okay, like you rip your jeans. I know my mama used to iron on patches on the knees of my jeans because it wasn't cool to have holes in your jeans back then. So she would iron on the patch on my jeans. You're ironing on a patch on the back of your quilt. Nobody's gonna see this. It's okay. Nobody but you and your long armor will know. Now, I will tell you that if you find yourself having to do this, do not try to open this seam. Do not try to press this seam open. Okay, press it to one side. Okay, if you press it open, you're inviting trouble. Just saying. So press it to one side. Okay, I'm gonna pass this around. You can see where Kathy came over. Sure. That's where your quarter of an inch seam would normally run. And yep, I want you to just a couple of threads above that. Okay. And the reason for that is if you remember, we talked about when you do a flip and stitch of any kind, if you're folding fabric up, there's a certain amount of threads that actually comprise the fold. So even with the fold, you're not folding in between threads. You got a thread on, maybe a thread on the bottom, thread on top. Might be one thread actually makes the fold itself. Okay? So you want that extra little thread or two to make up your fold, and that way when you fold that corner up, it's going to give you, okay, and when you're folding where two come together and you fold this fabric up, it won't cut your point off. Okay, just that thread or two to get your point right up to the fold. So, some of mine are really close. This is really close. This one was way far away. It's all good. I'm
did good, you did good, I'm here.
Yeah, but see, the idea is to get the point as close to the next block as you can. Okay? That one, this is not a show, this is not a fair piece, it's not a big judge. You see? But see, this part right here, there's a fold, right here. When I flip that over, see that pull? Ideally, I probably should have come up a little higher with that one, and I could go back in and rip that out and redo that, I'm gonna leave it like this, because I just cut that through. But, thank you, so you. I feel too good. We want it, we want to do that, as we talked this next year. I missed that corner.
Because it was awful close to the edge of the and so, so it was very white.
Yeah, it's white out on white corner. So when you fold this back, the credit, you want that point to be as close to there as you have it, I'm way over there.
I think one of mine, I have too much space in here.
Well, that's what that is, too much space.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm sorry, you said something about the interfacing?
I wasn't sure why that was taking.
Oh, because her piece was short. She
And
had
you
one
put it on
piece.
there before she said.
After, you put it on after, okay? Cause it was very close, her fabric was cut, when she trimmed up her piece, you know, sometimes it's too big, but sometimes if you're not paying attention, and in Kathy's case, her 1/4 inch seam, her scant was off. She's been sewing everything with a 1/8 inch seam instead of a scant 1/4. So all of her blocks were too big. And so when she was trimming, she had one that the thread barely caught. Okay, so yes, you want to iron, you want to put your interface, you want to stitch your seam first, then put your fray check on there, and then let it dry, and then put your interfacing on there. Just helps to hold it together. And hopefully, you're gonna, when you quilt over top of it, when you have it long armed, or you do your quilting on your domestic machine at home, there'll be hopefully something will come across there and hold it together for you with the quilting. Hopefully your design will pass right through there and nail it down.
That's right.
Exactly. Okay. All right. So that's what I can tell you about the sawtooth variation. And that kind of flying goose.
Okay, so.
That's one kind.
We're doing 2 different flying.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes. So because we did star legs and a flying goose to make your star legs, okay? It's just like anything, there's a million ways of doing things, okay? And different people come up with different ways. And one way, since you have to make, for your next block, the flying goose block, the 6.5 inch block.
So that was the 4.5, not 7 inch?
That made a flying goose. Okay? So, this next small block is the flying goose block. Okay, it's your 6.5 inch flying goose. There's actually 2 flying geese together. Okay? And this is what the finished block looks like. Right here. Okay? So, Stephanie Seven has from Quilt Addicts Anonymous. She has a series that she has done called Triangle Masterclass. So if it has a triangle shape in it, this is a good little class to take. This helps you get your basics down. If you wanted to do a little online something to practice, you can go in and purchase her Triangle Masterclass, and she works with you through a variety of different types of triangles. The reason that this is mentioned in the very beginning, how to sew 4 at a time, is because this is a down and dirty quick way to make multiple flying geese at one time. So, I moved on to the next block. close that up. The next sheet, right there. Yeah, we're on that one. Okay, so at the very top it tells you, there's the link you can go to on YouTube to watch just this component. This is going to help you to make four at a time, and what you're going to do is you're going to cut a, 3 and 7/8 inch squares. This is why it's important that you have the 1/8 inch markings on your rulers. So pay attention when you're purchasing rulers again. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your big block, one big block, and 2 of your background blocks. And this is going to be your bee fabric, your white bee fabric. You're going to cut your smaller, you're going to cut all your pieces to the dimensions shown, and then you're going to take your big block, one big block. Take 2 of your small blocks, put a diagonal line across your big block, or your 2 small blocks, okay? And then you're going to put 1 block in one corner and pin it, okay? 1 block, 1 corner. Make sure that all your edges match on both sides. Make sure your edges match. Pin it in place. Flip it over and do the exact same thing on the other side, on the other corner, the opposite corner. Okay? Y'all following? Opposite corner. So this corner and this corner, the one that I've already cut away. I cut that away so that I can have this. Okay? Then what you're going to do, you want your diagonal lines to meet up and match, and they're actually going to overlap in the middle. You want them to overlap in the middle. Pin both small blocks to your large block. Then you're going to take and you're going to sew. Put your 1/4 inch foot, your 1/4 inch presser foot, put the blade on the line, and you're going to sew 1/4 inch away from the line. All the way the length of that whole big block. You're going to turn it around and you're going to sew in the other direction 1/4 inch away, so that you've got a seam 1/4 inch away on both sides of your drawn line. Okay? Once you get that done, you're going to cut right down the middle on the drawn line. And that will give you the color and 2 teeth. It'll give you your print fabric, your background fabric with 2 teeth. And the 2 teeth will be your background. You're going to take 2 more of the background blocks, the bee white fabric, and you're going to, with the line drawn down the middle, you're going to put 1 on the remaining corner of your other block. And you're going to do exactly the same thing. You're going to sew down one side, you're going to turn it around, sew down the other side. And then you're going to cut that in half. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'll be honest with you. When I cut these, I thought, that does not look like 6 1/2. And it is. It's just shy of 6 1/2 inches. So, more fudging. Okay? Once I cut these, and I press them open, so I'm going to pass this around because I want y'all to see it, because it looks really odd. If you open your seams out on this, I think it does tell you to press towards the dark side, press towards your print. Okay? See how it comes across? Okay? If you look up underneath here, on the back, look on the back. See how I had to notch my white fabric? I did that because I pressed this thing open. Okay? See that? Alright. So then I'm going to cut down from here, and that's going to give me 2 fronds. Okay? And we've got the pictures, and it's pretty much, you go right by the pictures. You just need to know what order they're in. And I think the directions pretty directly spell that out. You follow line by line, and you'll be good. So Stacey, this is what it looks like. If you try to press this thing open, see where I had to notch that? And that's because I pressed it open. I had to snip that out of there because it was a big show. When I get ready to cut down through here to make my line, all of that gets turned away. It's kind of here to get turned away.
So what will,
That makes this. Okay? This one makes another one. Okay, so you make them two. So each big square makes four. Okay, so you got that.
I haven't done this one before. I didn't know from
Yeah.
this.
So again, mine didn't come out quite to 6.5 inches. I'm not sure why. It should have, but it didn't. You can see where if you flip it over, then you can see where I had to mark to get it to come out. And even then, you trim away, and again, they still don't come out. So what I will do, because once I made these, I was measuring up, because once you get everything attached, you're supposed to square up your blocks. Well, it doesn't come out. It doesn't come out 6.5. It's a bit shy. So when I attach this on my quilt, see, I've got some shortage. I'll let you take that in. So I won't use quite even a scan. I might do an eighth of an inch seam on that when I attach them.
Like you said earlier, as long as you do everything, there's no real else you can do.
Yes. So Kathy, was it you and I that when we were cutting, if we noticed that we cut something bad, was that me and you or me and Kathy Davidson?
I mean,
To put the pin in the one that was off?
yes, we did that.
Okay, so what, so when you're measuring and you're trimming and you're squaring, okay, if your little piece, if you know that some of your pieces come out okay and some of them don't, pin the ones that don't. Put them in two separate piles. That way, you don't have to go back through all of them again to figure out which ones were the wonky ones and which ones were the good ones. Okay? That if you've got, so if you're flipping corners, is that what we were doing? We were flipping corners on something, Kathy?
I think so, yeah.
When you flip in your corners, sometimes you'll have a corner that comes out short. If you look at this one, I've got one little piece right here that came out.
Oh,
When
yeah,
yeah, same thing. Okay, so that's a good size difference. So when I get ready to make that one, I have to pay close attention to this. Now, with this being such a big block, and that's very, very obvious to me, I will see that when I'm getting ready to attach. So I will see that when I attach that to whatever I'm attaching it to. But if you get a corner that's a little wonky, it's just a little bit short and it's a little bit off, and you're new and you're not sure of exactly what you're looking at, sometimes it helps you when you identify it as you're squaring your blocks. As you're squaring your blocks, put a pin in the corner. So if you've got a block that's got 4 pins on it, like we were doing with the economy block, if you find that you've got one corner that's short, you may or may not be able to catch that when you go back in and add something else to it. But just pin that block. Now, if you've got, with that in mind, if you've got, and I'm gonna use this with this side just to be able to see what I'm talking about. So, and I'm gonna exaggerate it a little bit. So, if I had a noticeable difference in my fabric, again, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sew, and I'm gonna put the long piece, the longer piece, the taller piece, down on the sewing machine, on the bed of the sewing machine. I'm gonna put that side down because I need to be able to see, and that's the side that I'm gonna butt my blade on my 1/4 inch, however I'm marking a 1/4 inch. If I'm using seam tape, I'm gonna run that edge. I'm gonna run the yellow edge, the longer edge. I'm gonna run that up against my 1/4 inch marked seam tape. If I'm using a bladed 1/4 inch foot, I'll run this edge up against the blade. Now, what that's going to do is, again, that's going to make me short on my shorter piece, right? That's going to put my stitching not a full 1/4 inch seam allowance on that shorter piece. But again, Sometimes you gotta fake it till you make it, and who's gonna know that it's not a full quarter of an inch on the good side of that quilt? Are you gonna tell them? You and your lawnmower. Yeah, the maker and the lawnmower. And if it's too short, again, if you're because we all know that sometimes we get a hold of a fabric line that frays something terrible. You got threads everywhere. If that's the kind of fabric you've got and you've got a short edge, interfacing might save your butt and keep you from having a seam come apart. Okay? As a long armor, I'm going to tell y'all that I do put some retention on your quilt. Okay? If I catch it, I will try to do my interfacing trick and save you. But not all long armors do that. Oh, yep. That's another thing you can do. Yeah, if you're putting pieces together and you know that your piece is not quite big enough, sometimes you can add a cheater strip, same fabric, you're gonna see a seam. But if you're more than a quarter of an inch off, you might need to add that little cheater strip, especially if it's on a whole block. Okay? And I'm gonna give y'all another little trick too. If those of you that like to add borders to your quilts, if the pattern doesn't specifically call for a border, if you're not taking your 3 measurements across the width or the length of your quilt to determine the length of your border strip, and you're piecing, if you have to piece a border strip, this is what I mean to say. If you're piecing a border strip, instead of sewing like we do for binding, you know how you do the crossover and you have the diagonal strip along the bias to make a binding? Please don't do that with your borders. Okay? If your borders are even a smidge too long because you didn't take the time to measure appropriately when you cut your border strips, or you come up with your border strips, like some people they'll just make a quilt, okay? And if they don't know any better because nobody's ever told them, and they just sew it on and then cut off the excess, sew on, cut off the excess. If you don't know, what that can cause is it can cause flagging, okay? When you go to get that long arm, you're going to end up with pleats in your pretty border that you attach, because it does what it's called flag. It waves like a flag in the wind, okay? If you use that bias joint to attach 2 pieces of binding or border together, it creates bias. And remember what we know about bias, right? Bias allows stretch. So when you're sewing, you could actually add stretch in that area and cause a flagged area in the middle of an otherwise nice, perfect border, even if you measured it. So y'all do know that everybody in here knows that when you're measuring for your borders, you measure across the middle, length and width, and then you measure across the middle again and the middle again. So you're going to actually take 3 measurements across the width of your quilt and average that. It'll go across the middle, the top middle, and then the bottom middle. Okay? So you're going to split it in half, and then you're going to get somewhere close to the middle of those middles, those 2 sections. So you need to have 3 measurements, 3 borders. Okay? 3 measurements for the width, 3 measurements for the length. Take that number and you measure out the amount of material. Don't just add it on and chop it off. And you either want to do side, side, and then add top and bottom, or do top, bottom, side, side. Okay? I'm just saying, it'll make your quilts look better, okay? If I don't have to stop and figure out how I can block or how I can put a pleat in or have to call you and tell you, hey, I'm going to have to take your border off and redo your border, it's going to be an additional charge because I've got to take your border off because I can't work with it like this. I'm not trying to do it to hurt your feelings, I'm trying to figure out the best way to make this quilt look as good as I can make it look. Okay? Just saying, that's just a long armor trick. Just, I feel like everybody should know that. I would want somebody to tell me. Okay, so this last block, once you get to this stage, you've got your pieces. Okay, you've got two pieces. We're going to put two of these together. Again, you want your piece with the intersection on top. You want to be able to see that as it's going under your pressure foot. Okay, because you want to get as close to that intersection as you can, but you still want to be on the inside of it. You want to be on the seam allowance side of it so that when you fold it open, you've got enough fabric that you don't end up with your points chopped off. Because again, we want to see nice crisp points. Nice crisp points. Now, test it here. That one, you can see nice pretty point. Now the point comes right up to the fold. The fabric folded over. Okay? Make your seams, and again, y'all remember now, okay, this side has got stretch because we're working with two different edges that both have bias. Okay, so we got stretch. Be careful. Go slow when you're sewing these together. Now, and again, when I went to square these blocks up, they didn't square up to quite 6.5. So I'll just know that I have to sew a short seam. Maybe add a little interface. Maybe not that short. But yeah, you can look. Sometimes it's not knowing how to sew perfectly, but how to fix your mistakes. Sometimes there's a workaround for fixing a mistake, and if you don't know how to do that, then you can't do that, right? Maybe you're just going, oh man, it looks like crap. We don't want them to look like crap. We want them to look as good as they can. So, all right. So, another trick, y'all. I told you I use washi tape on my rulers. I thought I did 16. Anyway, so if you're cutting repetitive things, and so like if we're always cutting 6.5, we're squaring everything to 6.5 inches, what I will do is take a piece of washi tape, okay, something with a high contrast, and I will mark off on my ruler. I'll find my 6.5 mark, and I know that I want to stay inside that 6.5. Okay, does that make sense to y'all? 6.5. Especially if it's hard for you to see the markings on your ruler. 6.5, 6.5. That way I know I'm squaring inside that. Especially if I'm using a ruler that's bigger than my desired block. Okay?
I like that. Yeah, sometimes the line is on the ruler and
Mm-hmm.
when you do that, you can use the side line and make sure it's
If you're cutting like the 1/8-inch markings, if you've got to cut a lot of fabric and you're squaring a lot of blocks to the 1/8-inch marking. Because I don't know about y'all, but I got on trifocal. Okay? It's easier for me to mark this one time. Sit and squint at it that one time, and then put my marking with my washi tape on here. And the good thing about washi tape is that when you're done, it's right up, and it doesn't leave adhesive on my ruler. Okay. They make some, if you've got clear rulers, they do make washi tape, and I've got like 4 or 5 different heats and things, but I can tell y'all that almost every time I've ever been in a craft store, if you go over to the clearance section, there's some kind of something washi tape over there on clearance. The packaging has been torn, or it's an ugly color, or something that didn't sell. And it's got the fall washi tape, and it's now spring. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what it looks like. I needed to do a job. They do make some that's neon, and it's a little small. I think it's like an eighth of an inch wide. It's neon colored. It's pink and orange and yellow. I think are the three colors that I've done. I bought some for myself. Um, that helps you again when you're doing repetitive cutting. Helps you to be able to identify that mark quickly without having to strain and find it. Okay. Any questions about this month? Again, on the uneven 9 pack, that's just it too. On the uneven 9 packs, the there is a typo. The little blocks are 2 inches by 3.5 inches, not 2.5. This I think it's correct on the sawtooth variation. I think the instructions are correct, but for some reason it got all wonky jawed. Color these 2.5. 2.5 by 3.5. Yep. Green. Yeah, I think the dimensions are different on the big one just a little bit. For that uneven 9 pack that sits in the middle of that one. I'm understanding. This block is a block. That's a block. Then you have this block is a block. That block. Even though it has this block inside. Okay. And I think the dimensions are a little bit different on that one than this one. It's bigger. Okay. And then you put the one together and substitute. Yep. Yeah, but she was asking. I was asking if this block here is not the exact same this of that. But it's not, it's separate. It's a little bit different size. All separate. That's a lot. Keeps it in. Actually, it goes together really fast. That's sometimes when you start. Yeah, it goes together really fast. So. One, you're always going to make just one of the big blocks, but the small blocks, most of the time you're making 4 or 5 of them. I'll set these up and these. And how they come together, how they come together. Wow. You what? Down the hall? Down the hall on the right hand side or one straight ahead? Keep going. Down in the hall, all the way. M-I-C-H-I-E. Okay, turn the record off of this.